The girl in the wheelchair wasn't moving. That was what made Avery stop. He was halfway past the fountain, boots crunching over a dusting of old snow, when the stillness around her cut through the rush of the city. People hurried past in business coats and sneakers, holding coffee cups and cell phones, all flowing around her like water around a rock. She sat alone in the middle of it, small shoulders squared, wheels turned at an odd angle, eyes fixed on the rising splash of water. Her hands were folded in her lap like she'd been told to. Sit nice. Metal braces climbed both her legs, catching the pale winter light, making her look like someone had tried to build a cage around her bones. The wheelchair was pulled a few inches off center, not facing the path or the exit, like somebody had pushed it, paused, and never quite finished the job. Avery's phone buzzed in his pocket, hard enough to sting his hip. Delivery app notification, a pharmacy reminder for his son's medicine, a low balance alert from his bank he didn't have time to open. Every second he stood still cost him a little more money and a little more margin. But the girl was still there. Still not moving. He slowed, jaw tightening. He knew how this city worked. Most folks walked by anything that wasn't their problem. Men like him, tired, brown-skinned, work badge clipped to a thin jacket, didn't just walk up to kids in public parks without thinking about how it might look. So, he didn't rush in. He veered toward the opposite bench and sat down with a quiet grunt, keeping the fountain between them. Close enough to see her face, far enough not to scare her. He rubbed his hands together, feeling the rough ridges from long shifts, then let them rest. The fountain's spray rose and fell with a steady rhythm. The girl watched it like it was the only thing that ever kept its promise. "You like the sound?" Avery asked, his voice low and easy. He nodded toward the water so she knew what he meant. She startled a little, then turned her head. Her eyes met his for half a breath. Wide, watchful, trying to decide if he was trouble or safety. She nodded once. "My mom says it helps me breathe better," she said. "Smart mom," Avery replied. The girl studied him for another moment, then turned back to the fountain. Her name, he learned, was Elise. She said it quietly, like she didn't say it to new people very often. Her mother had stepped away, just for a call, and told her to wait right there. She said it in a way that told Avery this wasn't new. Waiting was part of her life, the way deliveries and deadlines were part of his. "You been out here long?" he asked. She thought about it, eyes tracking a leaf floating on the water. "Longer than a movie," she said finally. That answer landed harder than any number. Wind slid between the buildings, sharp enough to make his eyes water. Elise's shoulders hitched once. Her fingers flexed against the thin fabric of her coat. "You cold?" he asked. "A little," she admitted, as if she wasn't sure she was allowed to say it. Avery took off his scarf, the faded gray one his son had teased him about, and lifted it where she could see. "This is a loan," he said. "You're responsible for it. Think you can handle that?" Her mouth twitched toward a smile. "I can handle it," she said. He stood halfway, leaned across the gap, and draped the scarf carefully around her shoulders, careful not to touch more than he needed to. The fabric bunched at her collarbone. She pulled it in closer with both hands, shoulders easing just a little. "Are you going to leave when she comes back?" Police asked. The question was so quick and quiet, he almost missed it. But it carried more weight than anything else she'd said. He looked down at his buzzing phone, thought of his son's prescription, the late fees, the manager who'd already warned him once about missed drops. Then he looked back at the girl with the metal on her legs and the water in her eyes that never quite fell. "I'll stay," he said, "at least until you're not scared anymore. If you were the one walking through that park, already late, already tired, and you saw a child alone like that, what would you do? Keep your head down and tell yourself someone else will handle it, or sit down and risk being misunderstood just to make sure they weren't alone?" Elise opened her mouth to say something else, but the sharp crack of heels on pavement rang across the park, growing louder, coming straight toward them. "Where did you get that?" The words hit before the woman even reached them. Elise flinched. Avery turned and saw her mother striding down the path. Phone clutched in one hand, handbag snug against her side. Her coat was clean white wool that didn't belong anywhere near park dust. Her hair was pulled into a tight twist that said she'd planned every second of her day. Her face looked carved out of stress. The second her eyes landed on the scarf around Elise's shoulders, the stress turned to suspicion. Avery rose slowly from the bench, palms visible at his sides. "She was cold," he said. No excuses, no extra details. The woman's gaze swept over him in a quick, practiced scan. Thin jacket. Delivery badge clipped at an angle. Work boots that had seen better days. She held herself like someone used to making decisions with incomplete information and dealing with the fallout later. "I don't need help," she said, each word crisp. Avery met her eyes without flinching. "I wasn't offering it," he answered. She needed it. Elise looked between them, confusion building in the tight line of her mouth. Her fingers dug into the scarf, as if afraid it would be taken as fast as it had appeared. "Mom," she said softly, "he stayed." That small sentence did what nothing else could have done. The woman's grip on her phone loosened. She ended the call without even lifting it back to her ear. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. "I'm sorry," she said, and the apology sounded like it had to climb over a wall to get out. "I shouldn't have left her." She moved behind the wheelchair and started adjusting Elise's gloves, checking her coat, tugging the scarf straight. Her hands moved fast and precise, like she was fixing a presentation slide. Efficient, controlled. But none of that touched the fear that had settled into Elise's back while she waited. Avery crouched, resting his forearms on his knees so he could see Elise's face again. "You did everything right," he told her. "You stayed where she told you. That's not easy. That's brave." Elise's eyes softened. A tiny pride flickered there. The woman watched this interaction, some mix of embarrassment, gratitude, and defensiveness tugging at her features. "Most people would have just kept walking," she said quietly. "Most people did," Avery replied. "I just didn't feel right joining them." If you were standing in her shoes seeing a stranger near your child, would you let your fear speak first and push him away, or listen to your child's simple testimony? He stayed. The woman straightened, finding her balance again. "I'm Carol Lynch," she said, as if she was used to that name meaning something to everybody. "Avery Brooks," he replied. The name Lynch tickled the back of his memory, like something he'd seen on a building sign or a business card he couldn't afford to keep. But right now, she wasn't a company. She was a woman who'd just seen proof that her daughter had been alone long enough for a stranger to step in. Carol turned the chair toward the path. Elise twisted to look back at him over her shoulder, scarf still snug at her throat. "Bye," she said. "See you, Elise," he answered, even though he was sure he wouldn't. As they moved away, Carol glanced back once, a quick look, like she was still trying to figure out what kind of man would sit with someone else's child when the world was telling him to hurry. The subway car rocked, but Avery's mind stayed at the fountain. He stood near the door, one hand gripping the metal pole, backpack slung over his shoulder. The train rattled through dark tunnels, but all he could see was the way Elise had held that scarf, and the way her voice had trembled when she asked if he would leave. He'd told himself not to think about it. He had deliveries stacked up tomorrow, a manager on his neck, and a pharmacy receipt stuffed in his pocket with numbers he didn't like. His son would be waiting at his mama's place, looking at the door the way kids do when they're counting on you to show up on time. But the question stuck to his ribs. Are you going to leave when she comes back? He'd seen that look before, in clinic waiting rooms where kids watched the clock and the door at the same time. in school offices, where his own boy had sat with a nurse holding a plastic bag of ice, eyes shining with worry and relief when Avery finally came crashing in, smelling like sweat and cleaning supplies. His stop came. He climbed the stairs, the cold night hitting him in the face. The neighborhood near his building wasn't the kind with fountains and business suits. It was the kind with corner stores still open late and kids jumping rope under streetlights. Inside the apartment, Malik Jr. was already asleep in the small bedroom, soft snores rising under his blanket. The little blue inhaler sat on the nightstand like a tiny guard. Avery checked his son's forehead with the back of his hand, then backed out quietly. At the kitchen table, he dumped his pockets. Crumpled receipts, a half-eaten granola bar, and the reminder slip from the pharmacy. He dropped into the chair and stared at the paper, but his mind kept rewinding to the park. Had he overstepped? Telling a stranger, "She's more than her condition," could backfire when that stranger lived on top floors he'd only ever cleaned. He rubbed his face and exhaled. "This is New York," he muttered under his breath. "People don't track down the guy who lent them a scarf. They forget and keep moving." He tried to convince himself that today had been a one-off moment, a strange kindness he'd never hear about again. But when he lay down on the sagging couch and closed his eyes, all he saw was a girl in a metal frame staring at a fountain and a woman in a white coat trying to hold herself together. If you'd risked stepping into someone else's mess for 10 minutes and then walked away, would you be able to sleep easy? Or would a piece of you stay awake, wondering what happened next? Avery was still turning that over when 3 firm knocks hit his front door. The knocks weren't polite. They were precise, 3 solid raps that said whoever stood on the other side wasn't lost or guessing. Avery sat up, heart thudding. Late-night visits in his building usually came with drama he didn't have energy for. He pushed himself off the couch, feet hitting the cold floor, and moved to the door. One quick check through the peephole froze him in place. Carol. She stood in the hallway under the harsh ceiling light, phone in one hand, the other hanging awkwardly by her side. No white wool coat now, no high heels, just a dark sweater, jeans, and sneakers. Her hair was down, a little frizz at the edges like the day had worn on her. Without the city around her, without the glass and steel, she looked less like a headline and more like a woman who hadn't slept well in weeks. Avery unlatched the chain and opened the door halfway. "Miss Lynch?" "Carol?" she corrected softly. "May I come in?" He stepped aside and let her pass. She glanced around the small space as she entered, the scuffed floor, the second-hand couch, the kid's jacket hanging on a chair, the school worksheet on the table with half the math problems done in pencil. "It's late," Avery said. "You all right?" She nodded, but her eyes said no. "I couldn't get that picture out of my head," she said. "Her in that wheelchair, you on that bench, and me on a call." He shut the door gently. "You want to sit?" he offered. She sank into one of the kitchen chairs, back straight out of habit, hands linked on the tabletop like she was about to present something. Her phone lay screen down near her fingers. "Elise won't stop talking about you," she admitted. "She keeps saying, 'He stayed, Mom. He just stayed.' Like that alone was everything." Avery sat opposite her. "Most days, that's all kids need," he said. "Somebody who doesn't rush them." "She told you her name," Carol said. "She told you about her breathing. She doesn't do that. She usually gives strangers one-word answers and a polite smile." "Maybe I got lucky," Avery replied. "No," Carol said. "You were safe. She felt it. And I realized I didn't know how to give her that anymore." She let her shoulders sag for the first time since he'd met her. "I'm not here to defend myself," she added. "I know I was wrong to leave her like that. I know it. I'm here because I don't know what to do next." If a woman used to commanding rooms walked into your worn-out kitchen and admitted she was lost, would you hold back because of who she was, or lean in because of who her child was? Avery folded his hands, grounded his voice, and said, "All right, start from the part that hurts the most." "The doctors told me to be strong," Carol said. "They didn't tell me what to do with my fear." She stared at a chipped spot in the table as the words poured out. "When Elise was born, they filled my days with information, charts, probabilities, exercises. They gave me binders thicker than most novels and told me if we worked hard enough, maybe her body would cooperate. Maybe she'd hit some version of normal." She gave a humorless laugh. "They never talked about her heart. Or mine." Avery listened, elbows on the table, saying nothing, just nodding now and then. He knew what it felt like to have professionals explain your life in words they didn't have to live with. "I made a schedule," Carol continued. "Therapy at 8, specialist at 11, conference call at 1, investor lunch at 3, home nurse at 6. I color-coded everything. I tracked every centimeter of progress like a stock price." She swallowed hard. "When we weren't working on something, I felt guilty. If we just sat and watched TV or went to a park without a purpose, I'd hear their voices in my head. 'You're wasting time. You're letting her fall behind.' So I almost never just sat." Avery thought of the fountain, of Elise watching water instead of a screen, of how peaceful she'd looked for those few minutes before the heels arrived. "Today," Carol said, "when I walked up and saw your scarf on her, and you sitting there like you had nowhere else to be, I felt two things at the same time. Anger that someone had stepped into my space, and shame that I hadn't been in it to begin with." She looked up at him, eyes bright. "You told me she was more than her condition." I smiled and nodded like I agreed. "But the truth is, I've been acting like her condition is the only part of her I'm allowed to pay attention to." A faint noise came from the bedroom. Malik turned over and sighed. The sound steadied Avery somehow. "My son's got breathing issues," he said quietly. "For a while I treated every cough like an emergency and every laugh like a pause between problems. It took me a minute to remember he's a kid first and a diagnosis second." Carol's lips trembled. "I freeze when she says hard things," she confessed. "When she asks, 'Am I too much?' or 'Are you tired of pushing me?' I change the subject. I suggest we practice walking. I make a joke, anything but answer the question." She took a breath that shook on the way in. "Then she spends an hour with you, and she comes home talking about how you didn't rush her, how you didn't tell her to be strong, how you just sat and listened." It hit me that a stranger in a thin jacket had done in 1 hour what I'd been dodging for years. She unclasped her hands and laid them flat on the table. "I can hire physical therapists, specialists, nannies, drivers. I can sign any check they put in front of me. But I cannot hire someone to be the mother she needs. That job is mine, and I am failing at it." She met his eyes, no armor left. "So I'm asking you for something I have never asked anyone on this level before. Will you help me learn? Not as an employee, not as some project, as a man who has clearly figured out how to love a child without a board of experts telling him how." Avery felt the room tilt slightly. Bills still waited in a messy stack beside them. His son still needed shoes. His phone would still buzz in the morning with roots and reminders. But across from him sat a woman who could buy anything she wanted and still couldn't buy the one thing that mattered. If you were in Avery's seat, already stretched thin, would you step deeper into this, knowing her world was big enough to shake yours? Or would you draw the line and say, "I've done enough for a stranger today"? Avery felt the room shrink and stretch at the same time. The stack of unpaid bills sat inches from Carol's expensive phone. His son's soft breathing drifted from the bedroom. Across the table, a woman who probably had a whole floor of people answering to her was waiting on his answer. "What you're asking for isn't small," he said finally. "You know that, right?" "I do," she replied. "I know you don't owe me anything. That's part of why I'm here, instead of trying to turn this into some formal program. I need you to be honest with me. not impressed by me. He rubbed his thumb along a scratch in the tabletop. I work a lot, he reminded her. Early drops, late runs. My boy needs me. Some days I barely have energy to keep my own head above water. I'm not asking you to fix us, Carol said. I'm asking you to stand next to us while I stop pretending I already know how to do this. What does that look like? He asked. In your mind, she swallowed. Come to the park sometimes, she said. Talk with Elise. Let me see how you listen when she's scared or tired. Tell me when I slide back into treating her like a project instead of a person. If I say something that would hurt you to hear from your own parent, I want you to say so. He leaned back, chair creaking. You realize your life and mine are built in different worlds, he said. People watch you. They talk about you. They don't even know I exist. If I step into this, I step into that. I won't put your name in headlines. She said quickly, I don't want this for show. I want this because when she said you stayed, I realized I hadn't. He thought about Elise's face when he handed her the scarf, his son's face when he'd shown up late to a school event with a work stain still on his shirt. All the times he'd promised himself he'd do better tomorrow. Okay, he said at last. Here's my line. I'll help as much as my time and my son allow. I'll meet you both at the park, talk, listen, tell you what I see. But I'm not Steph. I'm not a prop, and if at any point she looks like she's doing this for us instead of for herself, I'm out. Carol nodded, relief flickering across her features. That's more than I had any right to hope for, she said. He gave a small shrug. Kids don't get to pick the grown-ups around them, he said. Sometimes the rest of us have to step up. Family, this is where real life and sacrifice meet. If you were Avery, would you protect your peace and stay on your own grind, or risk stepping into a world that could hurt you just to help a child feel chosen? Carol stood to go, pausing with her hand on the door. First Saturday, she said. 10 in the morning, fountain, no assistants. Just us. After she left, Avery sat back down at the table. The bills hadn't moved. The numbers hadn't changed. But his life had just picked up a new kind of weight. One that didn't show up on any statement. Saturday came with gray clouds and thin light, the kind that made the whole city look tired. Avery walked into the park with his backpack slung over one shoulder and a soft foam ball tucked inside. His hands were already cold. His mind was already running through the week ahead. But when he saw Elise, all of that drifted to the background. She was by the fountain again, but this time the wheelchair faced the water properly. A small Bluetooth speaker sat on her lap, playing a mellow track. Her head bobbed along gently. The scarf he'd loaned her was tucked neatly under her coat. You made it, she said when she spotted him. You doubted me? He asked, pretending to be offended. She shook her head. I just hoped, she said. Carol stood a few feet away in a simple dark coat and boots, hands in her pockets, no phone pressed to her ear, no assistant hovering nearby. She looked like a woman who had dressed herself instead of a stylist dressing a brand. So, Avery said, dropping his backpack onto the bench, who picked the music? Me, Elise said proudly. Mom wanted old stuff. Classic, Carol corrected. I wanted classic. We're going with whatever the boss wants, Avery said. And today, the boss is Elise. He pulled out the foam ball. You ever play catch like this? He asked. We keep it easy. You say when to start and when to stop. Deal? Deal, she said. They started close, gentle tosses, the ball light enough not to hurt her wrists but solid enough to feel real. Every time she caught it, Avery cheered like she'd just landed a free throw in overtime. Every time she missed, he took the blame, saying his throw was crooked. Carol watched, arms crossed, unsure if she should step in or stay back. Avery caught her eye once and gave a tiny shake of his head. Stay. Let this be Elise's space. Break, Elise said after a while, chest rising a little faster. You heard the boss, Avery said, dropping onto the bench. Break time it is. Carol sat carefully on the other end, leaving middle space open in case Elise wanted it. The speaker hummed softly. People walked dogs, pushed strollers, jogged past in athletic gear. None of them knew that this ordinary-looking moment was bigger than any earnings call. "Do we have to leave now?" Elise asked her mother. "No," Carol said. She glanced at her watch, saw the string of missed notifications, and let her arm fall back into her lap. "No, we don't." "Are we making you late?" Elise asked. In that simple question was all the history of being pushed aside for urgent grown-up things. Carol hesitated. This was the fork she'd always taken the wrong way. "Work will be fine," she said finally. "Right now I'm exactly where I need to be." If you were listening in, would you believe those words mattered more to Elise than any therapy milestone? Sometimes the biggest miracle isn't a cure. It's a parent choosing a bench over a boardroom. Avery didn't say anything, but he saw the shift. He also knew choices like that came with a price. Somewhere, in an office far above, someone was already noticing that Carol Lynch wasn't answering her phone. "You've been hard to reach." The comment fell across the polished conference table like a cold coin. Monday morning. Floor-to-ceiling windows, city skyline. Carol sat at the head of the table, blazer sharp, hair back in its familiar twist. On the wall, a slide showed charts in blue and green. Around her, directors and advisors sat with tablets and coffee cups, but their eyes were more on her face than on the numbers. "I rescheduled those calls," Carol said. "The deals are still on track." "That's not the concern," one board member replied. "You've been reallocating your time, blocking out hours, showing up on blogs and social feeds in unexpected ways." The PR advisor slid a folder across the table. Carol opened it. A photo stared back at her. Herself in a simple coat, standing by the fountain, Elise grinning in her chair. Avery bent down to say something that made them both laugh. "People are asking who he is," the advisor said. "There's curiosity about your companion. Some are calling him a bodyguard, some a new partner, some just a mystery. It's not negative yet, but it's unpredictable." "He's a friend who helped my daughter when I failed to watch her," Carol said. "He's also a father who knows more about real family pressure than any of us in this room." "We're not questioning his character," another director said quickly. "We're questioning the optics. You lead a major company. You're under constant scrutiny. Publicly attaching yourself to someone outside your usual circle in a very emotional context raises questions we don't control." Carol thought of Elise taking those soft steps. The look on her face when she sat on the fountain wall and said, "I did it." The way she clutched Avery's scarf like a shield. "Do you want me to pretend my daughter doesn't exist?" she asked. "Or pretend the people who actually understand her life aren't worth my time?" "We want you to protect your position," the advisor said. "Limit contact. Keep it private. If he must be involved, keep him behind the scenes. It's about stability. If your paycheck and reputation depended on keeping powerful people comfortable, even when they were wrong, would you go along? Or would you let them feel the discomfort of the truth?" Carol closed the folder. "Stability for who?" she asked. "For investors who don't know my child's name? Or for a little girl who's finally starting to believe she's more than a medical file?" No one answered. "I'm not cutting him out of her life," she said. "Not to make a cleaner narrative, not to keep gossip quiet. If people have questions, they can ask me. I'll answer them. But I won't sacrifice my daughter's progress to make anyone else feel comfortable." The room went still. She knew some respect grew in that silence. She also knew some patience shrank. Either way, a line had been drawn. "Okay, champ," Avery said. "Your call. We can stay in the chair or we can try something new. You're the one in charge of your body." Elise looked down at her legs. The braces were snug, black against her red leggings. The walker stood in front of her, waiting. The wheelchair was behind, brakes locked. The fountain splashed nearby, the sound that had always soothed her now mixing with nerves. "Can we try?" she asked, voice small but firm. "We can," Avery said. 1 step, 10 steps, half a step. All of it counts. And if you say stop, everything stops. Carol stood to one side, hands open but not reaching. Her heart hammered so loud she could feel it in her throat. The therapist had cleared this. The doctors had approved this. But none of their papers showed her what it would feel like to watch. Elise gripped the walker handles, pushed herself up, and stood. Her knees shook. Her breath came faster. Avery and Carol moved closer, not touching, just forming a loose shield. She took 1 step. Metal clicked. She took another. The path between the bench and the fountain might as well have been a mile. People in the park slowed their stride without meaning to. Something in them recognized effort when they saw it. "You got it," Avery said softly. "Don't worry about anybody watching. This is between you and the ground." Halfway there, Elise paused. Her arms trembled. "I'm tired," she whispered. "We can stop," he said. "Or you can rest a second and see how you feel. Your choice." She closed her eyes, breathed in the cool air, and took 2 more steps. The stone edge of the fountain bumped her shins. She laughed, startled by her own success. "I did it," she said. She let herself sink down onto the low wall, legs out in front, braced and shaking but free from the chair. The walker stood to the side. For once, the wheelchair was behind her, not beneath her. Carol covered her mouth with one hand. Tears slipped out before she could stop them. They said this might never happen. She whispered to Avery a few minutes later when Elise leaned back to rest against her. "Not out here. Not like this. They told me to manage my expectations. They never told me what to do if she passed them." Avery glanced at Elise, eyes closed, a smile still on her face. "They don't know her," he said. "They know charts. There's a difference." "She called it a quiet miracle," Carol said. "She said it like it was small. But to me, to you, it's everything," he finished for her. "If you've ever had someone tell you to lower your hopes so you won't get hurt, you know how heavy that advice can feel. Would you accept that limit, or risk the pain and believe there might be more?" Carol wiped her cheeks, then turned to Avery. "You did more than keep her company at a fountain," she said. "You gave her the courage to try, and you gave me the courage to watch without running away." He shrugged like it was nothing. "I just showed up," he said. "No," she replied. "You stayed. There's a difference." She took a steadying breath. "You didn't just give my daughter a miracle today, Avery. You gave me permission to stop being her manager and start being her mother again. I don't know how to thank you for that." For a moment, the man who'd always lived on the lower floors didn't know where to put his hands or his eyes. Being needed was one thing. Being honored was another. Spring pushed winter out of the city one stubborn day at a time. By the time the trees in the park started hinting at green, the fountain had become less of a proving ground and more of a meeting place. On some mornings, Avery's delivery route coincidentally swung him past the park at the right hour. On some afternoons, Carol's calendar had blocks marked simply Elise time, with no room for anyone else's agenda. Elise's steps grew a little stronger. Some days she walked, some days she didn't. The miracle wasn't that she suddenly left the wheelchair behind. The miracle was that she no longer measured her worth by how many steps she took. Avery's son, Malik Jr., joined them sometimes. He'd show Elise how to play a game on the tablet or trade jokes about teachers. Watching them, Carol saw something rare. 2 kids with very different challenges, seeing each other as equals, not as projects. At Lynch Towers, the company started to feel different too. New policies came out, flexible schedules for caregivers, emergency leave that didn't require humiliation to obtain, a hotline for staff in older buildings to report safety issues without fear of being ignored. Some executives grumbled in private. Others quietly said finally under their breath. In meetings, Carol brought up stories from the ground more often than projections from the screen. She talked about parents who worked nights, about tired eyes behind reception desks, about tenants who used canes and crutches navigating broken elevators. It made some people shift in their seats. It also made a few people sit up straighter. Avery's life didn't suddenly turn luxurious. The couch still sagged. The bills still came. But something in the way he carried himself shifted. He wasn't just surviving. He was part of a story that reached far beyond his block. One evening, all four of them sat in his small living room. Avery, Malik, Elise, and Carol. A cartoon played low on the TV while the kids sorted through a pile of building blocks on the rug. Elise carefully snapped pieces together with Malik's help, braces peeking out from under her leggings. Carol leaned back on the couch, shoes off, toes curling into the worn carpet. "You know," she said, watching them, "if you'd kept walking that first day, my daughter would probably still be waiting alone by that fountain every time I took a call." "If you hadn't come back to my door," Avery replied, "she might still think adults disappear when things get hard." He let the thought sit for a moment. Sometimes it takes two people from completely different worlds to give a kid what they should have had all along. Family. Somewhere in your life, there is a fountain moment. Someone waiting, maybe not in a wheelchair, but in their own kind of stuck, hoping somebody will notice and stay. You might be the only person close enough to see it. If this story touched you, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next support story that inspires, heals, and challenges. And in the comments, share which moment in Avery's journey hit you hardest. Your words might be exactly what another person needs to find the courage to stay for someone in their own world.